Okay, Jules, I'll continue my lecture. I know you're just so not psyched.
No. I think it's really interesting, and I think people need to hear it to understand.
One of the things that always gets me, and obviously we have a lot of comparisons with American sports and the way they're set up, right? So using the NFL as an example, but I think the NBA is very similar, is there you have 32 owners or 31 owners plus the Green Bay Packers, which are their own thing going, but who are all billionaires. Yeah. Some have business partners, some don't. And they get to decide who goes and buys a club in the league. And until this year, they weren't even allowed to take private equity money. Now they're allowed to take private equity money, I think up to a certain percentage. I think it's 10% or 20%. So it's a very different landscape. And the advantage of having a single owner is that there's one guy, sometimes it's a woman, taking responsibility.
Make the decision.
And then you can make the decision. It's his money. It's his backside that is on the line. So that creates, I think, a lot of efficiency. You can make decisions quickly and so on. One of the problems in football is that I Googled this the other day, and it was on the internet, so it must be true. 190, you know how many people, I nearly said it. Do you know how many people in the world are worth $10 billion or more?
190?
192, according to the internet. I know, I blew that one, right? But I'm going to assume you have to be worth at least 10 billion to own a top flight football club all by yourself.
Yeah. So you mean individually it's really hard on your own to buy a Manchester United?
Yeah. And it's not because you're then spending 8 billion, it's because you're tying up so much of your assets, right? Now, and that's why so many owners, the owners we see in the Premier League are either people like Tony Bloom or the guy at Brentford, Matthew Benham. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that these guys are not worth 10 billion. However, obviously they bought the club for a lot lower, put in their own money, whatever, they're smaller clubs, and they've grown into it. I think everybody else who owns it by themselves, they need partners because they may be worth 10 billion. But, you know, if I'm worth 10 billion because I own a company that's worth 4 billion, I can't like sell that company from one day and next to go and buy Aston Villa or Tottenham Hotspur, right? So it's just, it's basically that simple. So you have to find other ways to own the club or to run the club. And at that level, effectively, you're either talking essentially royal families, states, stuff like that, the Qatar, UAE, Saudi situation, or sovereign wealth funds, basically. Or you have to go down this road where you raise money from investors. And, you know, you may be a billionaire yourself raising money from investors, but investors want their money back. And I think this is part of the reason why there is this push towards, we've talked about it before, towards cutting back, towards financial regulation, which some people don't like. Some people say, oh, no, it's the cartel. Whatever. Okay, cartel schmartel. You're in the minority. You don't get to decide this, right? Most people want this because most people want their club to be stable and to exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I just find this whole ownership debate interesting because you won't be able to regulate it, right? You won't be able to say that you can't have state owning clubs, right? Is it legally possible? It's not legally possible for FIFA or UEFA or even a league to say like, we don't want the Saudi money or we don't want the Qatar royal family money or it's not possible, right?
I think
there's some sort of freedom somewhere.
So yes and no. I mean, I think within the European Union, it's extremely difficult.
Right.
In the UK, it would have been more possible, I think. I think they could have blocked the Newcastle deal.
Could we get to a situation where the Premier League clubs, the 20 clubs, decide who the owner is if Everton gets sold, and then the other 19 clubs get together at the Premier League and said, John Textor, show us your account. And
let's not pick on John Textor.
No, but I'm just saying, like in the NFL, is that possible?
So, again, I'm not a lawyer. You know what I think of lawyers. So they have something called the fit and proper person test, and it might have a different name now, right? But the idea is, for example, let's say the people who, the guy who owns Everton, who of course is Farhad Moshiri, and it's only him, and it's all his money. There's nobody else involved. Let me be very clear on that for legal reasons. Let's say he decides to sell it to, I don't know, some cyber fraudster, no name, or let's say he decides to sell it to a Mexican drug lord or whatever, right? Or an American drug lord who's using laundered money or whatever. And I'm not suggesting Farhad Mashiri would do this. He says, well, I didn't know, right? And then that guy goes to prison and all the money's gone and they're not solvent. Or let's say he sells it to somebody who says like, which some people might say nearly happened, like, oh, look, I'll pay you 10 billion or I'll pay you, $1.5 billion for Everton. Here's a check. And then Mashiri leaves and then all of a sudden there's no money to run the club, right? Yeah. So that's why you have to have fit and proper persons test. Yeah. And you can disqualify owners in certain situations. But beyond that, they can't just say no because we don't like this type of owner. Yeah. Right? As the rules stand. I'd love to see, I think they could. If the 20 Premier League clubs got together and said, nah, we're going to have rules. Can't be a sovereign wealth fund. It has to be a private actor. Has to have this, that, and that.
Do you think they could do that?
I think they could. I think there'd be legal challenges and then they'd have to sort it out. But the problem is, I don't think they will. I don't think they would. For the reasons turkeys don't vote for Christmas, right? Because if I own a club and I want to sell it one day, I don't want somebody telling me, no, you can't sell to him because we don't like him, right? Or her.
Fair enough.
So that's a difficulty. And so you might say, and some people say, well, the best model is kind of the membership model, right? Yeah. Members elect a board and so on, right? And Bayern have a version of that. Borussia Dortmund have a version of that.
Yeah, German clubs in general have...
They also have a ton of regulation, which some people might say is a restraint of trade, right? Yeah. But the most famous examples are Barcelona and Real Madrid, and they're very different. Yeah. And again, a little lesson, whatever. But Real Madrid, the members vote for president. However, if you want to run for president, they put in certain restrictions, certain minimum requirements. And I'm going off the top of my head. If I get this wrong, don't shoot me. Just correct me. Write to me nicely on Twitter. I think you must have been a club member for at least 30 years, which obviously disqualifies
a lot of people.
You must have been, I think, held a board position or something for 10 years, which obviously further reduces it. And the big thing is you have to have a personal bank guarantee. So you have to have a bank that goes over and says, yes, Mr. Julian Lawrence
supports you.
Has, I think it's 90 million euros. Actually, I think it's a percentage of the club budget, so it might be more or less, whatever. But it's a number like that. Yeah. Has 90 million euros in his bank account that we've set aside just in case, you need it, right? Which is a way of cutting out most people who don't have 90 million. Right? So the joke is that, with these eligibility requirements, there's literally 3 people in the world who could be president of Real Madrid, and one of them happens to be Florentino, right? Yeah. So the downside with that is that when you limit it so much, you create a situation where the same guy's always going to be in charge. Yeah. Florentino's, in many ways, has been very, very successful for Real Madrid.
Interesting.
The problem is, I think, and that's why right now, I think if I'm Florentino, now I am rewriting the rules to open it up to different people while still safeguarding the club. Yeah. Because it can't be, you can't have a pool, once he goes,
it's not
you have a pool of 2 people running. What if one of them's a moron? What if one of them hits his head and goes insane, right?
Because at the end of the day, Gab, this is all good, but what makes a good owner, regardless if it's a state fund, if it's an individual, it's a family, it's 2 families, it's a hedge fund, it's anything, is how competent the people who run your club on a daily basis or as an owner will be, right?
Yes.
Because you can say, okay, let's just go for families, and only family can own Premier League clubs. So the Cronkies, the Glazers, etc., etc. Some of those won't be good enough anyway. And on the other hand, you can have a hedge fund, I'm sure, who could do a good job at owning Chelsea. It doesn't have to be like a freak show like Bohely and Ekbali, for example.
Exactly. And I think the argument in favor of the hedge fund is that because people have their money in there because they answer to outside investors, if the investors aren't happy with the way they're running the club, they're going to vote with their feet. Yeah. They're going to say, So I think they have a commitment usually, I think it's between 5 and 8 years. After 5 years, they pick up the phone and say, hey, Bedad, I'm not re-upping here.
How's my money doing?
Yeah, go find somebody else, right? And then all of a sudden, he's got to go, try to get somebody else. And if he can't do it, then he has to sell the club, right? Yeah. So that's the thinking there. The other model with Barcelona is the requirements to be Barcelona president are a lot looser than at Real Madrid. So you still have a vote, but many more people are eligible to run.
Yeah.
And the risk there, and this is the risk I think with any club like that, is that a little bit like politics. As soon as I get elected, I'm thinking of getting re-elected. And what do people want? Oh, look, I inherited a massive hole in the public finances. Oh, let me pull some levers and bring in some Lewandowskis and some Kessies. Is that the right thing? Would he be doing that if it was his money on the line?
Yeah.
These are the big questions. So I don't know what the answer is. I think it's it's a cluster mess to regulate. I do think, and I don't even know whose job it would be to regulate, because UEFA could say, okay, we're going to have rules to play in our competitions, right? But UEFA want Paris Saint-Germain and Manchester City in their competitions. So do they grandfather them in? Do they say, okay, from now on, anybody except for you guys who are already in, right? We make these rules. Will they stand for it? So there's a lot of tension there. I don't know how you resolve it, but I think it shows how things have changed over the years, and football needs to evolve, and football needs to answer these challenges.
What do you think, just to finish up, what will happen at Chelsea? Do you think it will be status quo? Do you think in the end Bohely will give up and sell his 13% shares to Clearlake? Or how do you see this one panning out?
So I think it's pretty obvious Clearlake have access to a lot more capital than Bohely does, right? Because he wouldn't have involved Hans-Jörg Wyss and these other people. I mean, honestly, other than money, I don't know what poor Hans-Jörg Wyss, who's massive philanthropist, wonderful person or whatever, but the reality of being 88 or 89 is the reality of being 88 or 89, right? I think the most realistic case is that Bohely, if they're pushed to it, Bohely will sell to Bohely, and then go back to being a part owner of the LA Dodgers.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't know. And I think the difficulty is going to be also putting at what valuation do you put, like, on Iqbal, like how much money do you demand from Iqbal to buy you out? And also then does Iqbal give, because ultimately Clearlake are in charge, they have 61.5%.
Exactly,
there is this power sharing thing, but
even the fact that Bohely got so much airtime was weird in the sense that it's only 13%. When you see that our friend John Texter, like our brother from another mother, at Palace with 45%, has nothing to say. You never see him. I'm not even sure he's allowed into the stadium. Bohely took all the limelight and everything when he was really a minority shareholder.
Yeah, I think Clearlake said, let's put him to the front, put him in charge, maybe because he already owns a sports team and clearly running the Dodgers and running Chelsea are identical. But I don't even know if he does run the Dodgers, frankly, or is he just the guy in the box, you know, with his blazer? I don't know. But my guess is it's easier for Clearlake than Bohely raising a whole bunch of, because the other thing with Bohely too is, like, first of all, both know the club situation, right? And the club situation is not good. There are PSR issues. They have committed, and remember the whole thing with the sale price, they're committed to investing nearly another $2 billion over 10 years. Now they've spent a lot of money, but they still need to get to that, right? If I'm Bohely, do I really need to want to I'd have to raise all this money, buy out Clearlake, which would cost a lot of money, which I would need to raise, have another set of investor coming to me and being like, oh, are we going to see a return in 5 years? How are we going to do that? When I know the club's finances from the inside are what they are. So it's cheaper and more effective and easier for Clearlake to buy out Bohely than vice versa. But who knows?